Welcome, everyone. Welcome to all our attendees to this roundtable organized by my colleagues and peers at BRISMES and elsewhere, Professor Paola Rivetti and Dr. Firouzeh Farfardin. My name is Sabiha Alouche. I'm simply here to welcome all of you to this roundtable. I'm the chair of BRISMES Outreach and Pedagogy Committee, and you might have come across our work previously. The committee take a lead and assist in teaching and public awareness of the Middle East and its language and cultures in progressive ways through events and the development of relevant resources. So without further ado, I am going to hand over to our chairs, Paula and Firouzeh, and yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much, Sabiha, and welcome everyone. My name is Paola Rivetti. I'm a member of the Council of BRISMES. With Firouzeh, we had been, of course, in touch since, in particular, more intensely since December, January, discussing the situation, and we both felt that it was really important to not only organize a roundtable about what's going on in Iran, taking this kind of longer perspective, and also a perspective that we want to be, progressive and sensitive to human rights, but also to anti-imperialism and the different struggles that also inform our professional and political practice. Hence, we invited a number of scholars, activists, colleagues whose work is particularly dear and important to us, and we are delighted, to be able to have this space that we really hope is going to be a space of. I don't particularly like this word, but I think it might be the right one in this moment of compassion, where we can, transparency, compassion, and intellectual engagement, where we can actually, a little bit counter the climate of polarization and violence that we have not only in Iran, Lebanon, and Gaza, and so many other places in the region, but also within the diaspora. So I'm not gonna spend too much time introducing the topic of the roundtable. My colleague Firouzeh will do that. I wanted to just a couple of information. The first one is that I think people can use the Q&A function to ask questions to our panelists. You should see it in the in the lower part of your screen. And I would like, however, to introduce our panelists today. We're very lucky to be able to hear from them. Firouzeh Farfardin is a university assistant in the area of gender and politics at the University of Vienna, where she teaches and conducts research on feminist and gender counter strategies against authoritarianism in the Global South. She is also an associate fellow at the International Research Group on Authoritarianism and Counter Strategy, hosted by the Potsdam University and supported by the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation in Germany. We will next hear from Nassaran Saremi, who is an interdisciplinary researcher, art critic, instructor, and environmentalist, specializing in cultural and social analysis. With a background in philosophy and aesthetics, she is currently a PhD candidate in media and communication studies at Simon Fraser University in Canada. And her work explores mass politics, social change, and the cultural aesthetic composition of social practice. Next, we will hear from Mehrdad Emami, who just, graduated or obtained his PhD in sociology from METU University in Ankara, Turkey. His dissertation is titled The Formation of the Subaltern and Counter-Hegemony in the 2017-2022 Uprisings in Iran, which examines the uprising through a Gramscian lens using subaltern formation and counter-hegemony in this time frame. Mehrdad is a very prolific activity as a translator as well. He translated works on social movement, Marxism, ideology, Turkish politics into Farsi, and has led workshops in Turkish on Iranian social movements. He edited and co-translated a volume, among the many others, with Saeed Mozaffari, tracing the protests in Iran, popular uprising from 2017 to 2022, which will be published soon in Turkey. And I also would like to mention an article he published. We actually co-wrote it, but Mehrdad took the lead of it last year on criminological encounters on the regime change industry, women's rights, and imperial war. So just after the so-called 12 Days War. Next, we will hear from Suzanne Karimi, who's an Iranian feminist writer and activist currently pursuing a PhD in comparative gender studies at Central European University. Her research interests include sexual politics, anti-fascist feminism, feminist literary and cultural studies, with a particular focus on contemporary Iran. And then last but not least, we're going to hear from Maziar Samei, who's a research associate at the Center for Global Political Economy at the University of Sussex. He works on the history of European integration, capitalist futurity, and political ecology in the Middle East. So the way in which this is going to work is that we will hear from each of the speakers, and I'm going to leave the floor now to my colleague Firouzeh, to whom I'd like to ask if she could give us a context and a deeper analysis of this very traumatic moment. Thank you.
Thank you, and warm welcome from my side as well. Thank you for all the support and organizing of this panel, Sabiha and BRISMES, but of course, a special thanks to Paola for initiating this idea of the organizing panel together that hopefully would be the first of the series on the kind of timely issue that we are facing. To be honest, it's not very easy to talk here and make sense of the events particularly in the academic format. We are in the middle of literally war, and many of us Iranians have no news from our loved ones for days. But at the same time, I really think that it's crucial to begin as soon as possible to reflecting on what is unfolding in front of our eyes. And that's my task today, just to briefly explaining the context that led us to organizing this event, what was the main questions or concerns that trying to find a response for it. And also for that, I think I need a bit summarize what has happening recently. Also, I'm almost sure that most of the people here are aware more than me, but please accept my apology if I kind of repeating something you already know. So I have to kind of say some things about the context. So on February 28, Israel and United States launched strikes against Iran. This happened immediately after a round of the negotiation with Iran about the nuclear program that concluded in Geneva. Another round was expected, but instead the bombs fell. In the first 12 hours of the strike, nearly 900 strikes happened, and they killed the supreme leaders, dozens of the officials, and more tragic one that 160 civilians, most of them children, when a U.S. missile hit a girls' schools in Minab in the south of Iran, got killed. Iran, of course, responded with hundreds of missile and drone attacks, and very quickly the confrontations escalated into the regional war across the Middle East. As of today, thousands of civilians have been killed, particularly in Iran and Lebanon. Thousands more are injured, displaced, and critical infrastructures deliberately targeted and destroyed. Inside Iran, while the country has been under severe kind of foreign attack, still the government cut the internet totally. And despite years of propagating and foreseeing the war and confrontations, there were no shelters, no warning sirens. And once again, like the previous 12-day war, most people felt abandoned. As if it was not enough, the war, the Islamic Republic began to threatening anyone who gathered publicly or criticized the Islamic regime and war policies. Many have got arrested so far, while prison already full. You may know that more than 40,000 people were detained during the recent wave of protests in January in Iran. So this is the pictures from inside Iran, but outside Iran, the story is a bit different. In the very hours after strikes begin, two groups kind of take the streets. The more visible group among Iranians particularly consisted of monarchists or those who accept the former crown prince as the leader of so-called future transitional phase in Iran. They thanked Israel and the United States, waved Israeli and US flags, and celebrated the death of Khamenei. But also another group mobilized, anti-war groups, Iranians, non-Iranians. They protested the imposed war, chanting hands off Iran, and many co-organized by pro-Palestinian movements. Among these protests, this anti-war protests, those that actually received the most media attention and drew the largest crowds turned to pro-Islamic Republic rallies. You can see many flags of the Islamic Republic being raised around, and some cases picture of Khamenei as the so-called martyr of the excess of resistance raising around. For many of us, Iranian in diaspora, there is no place in either of these spaces that claim to speak in solidarity with the people of Iran. They want us to choose between the killers, between war and brutal repressions, between monarchists and campists. But this sense of isolation and feeling minority, both among Iranians and also those supposed to be our transnational allies, did not new. It's not the first time we have felt excluded from the transnational spaces that claim solidarity. But let's not go back very far in the history, but just in December 2025, when the Tehran Bazaar went on the strike. What a time began as a just economic protest at the beginning, turned quickly into the anti-Islamic Republic wave of protest. You may heard that on January 8, millions took the streets. It becomes the largest single-day street protest in the country's history. That same night, as millions filled the streets, their connection with the world just cut and disappeared. For 2 days, we had no news from what's happening inside there. And then whispers began to emerge, and they revealed that the scale of violence that shocked even those familiar with the brutality of the regime, what may now describe as the largest recorded massacre in the history of the world, carried out within 48 hours, took place during that blackout. And yet, what's then important for our discussion, during those days, while people were being killed, while the internet was cut, but family doesn't know about whether their loved ones are alive or not, there was almost no mobilization from transnational progressive movements outside Iran, particularly comparing 2022 and, Jina uprising. The only visible mobilization largely came from monarchist networks and their allies, and they called openly on the United States and Israel to attack their homelands. But the problem was not, my opinion, that silence from progressive or anti-colonial movement. In many cases, some even believed or helped to circulate this claim that the protests mainly were killed by the Mossad agents, as if it were the first time the Islamic Republic had massacred its own people, or the first time foreign agents or intelligence actors had been presented in Iran political landscape. So it was the ways that it was circulated in so-called progressive circles. In some cases, even suffering of Iranians was not only ignored, but publicly mocked. You may heard about the Middle East, prominent Middle East scholar tweeted and joked about the scale of repression in Iran. At the same time, agent of the Islamic Republic and segment of the what is often called as the campist left launched campaigns are urging Iranians not to talk about the violence they are facing in Iran, According to their argument, talking about repression in Western languages would make Iran bombardable because imperial powers supposedly need human rights narrative to justify invasion that now we know that they don't need anymore. Through a kind of, I would say that ethical policing, they discourage discussion and mobilization against repression in Iran. Ironically, this then become yet another reason to avoid solidarity. Iranian politics appear dominantly by this far right, partially because of other voices has been pushed out. So monarchies got the same. So we must ask this question, how did we arrive here? How did the suffering of Iranians become at best laughable from one side and the bombardable from the other side? The logic consequently abandons the people themselves. During the 12-day war, photos circulated widely showing Israeli missiles with the slogan, "Women, Life, Freedom" written on them. Recently, another image went viral. Iranian missiles launched toward Israel and neighboring countries, carrying the inscription, "In the memory of victim of Epstein Island." The irony is really devastating. And perhaps this is where our conversation must be begin. The lives of the peoples in Iran, in the region, and even more movements of the solidarity with them had been reduced to geopolitical calculation. Why is the slogan "No to War" so quickly interpreted as support for the Islamic Republic? And in the same manner, why is saying no to the Islamic Republic so easily reduced or labeled as standing with the imperialist power? For many of us, it's not just the academic and political but also deeply personal and emotional one. Personally, many of us lose some of our friends and allies during times that we need acts of solidarity the most. We lose comrades to campism and war advocates, while so seeing that war normalized, if not encouraged, by some fellow Iranians and colleagues in academia. It became a source of exhaustion for many activists who feel additional fatigue and despair facing the tragedy unfolding in front of us. And it is not as if it is not enough to see our loved ones under bombs and threats from the regime. And it is this precise situation that calls for honest discussion about international solidarity, about the dangers of geopolitical reductionism, about the limits of existing Western center framework of internationalism, and about the need to rethink imperialism and anti-imperialist strategy in the world falling apart in front of our eyes. I will finish with this kind of provocative thing. If Palestine rightfully must be understood as a mirror reflecting the genocidal restructuring of our world and the dominance of the colonial war regime, then the current war in Iran, I would argue, reveals another profound crisis. Crisis, or I don't know, perhaps even impossibility of international solidarity in its current form. And I think it would be good to start for our conversations because our panelists tackle different aspects of this timely issue today and based on their academic expertise, but also their activism. I am sure that they have so many things to say about this dilemma that we are facing and the way perhaps out of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Firouzeh. I'm sure we would give you a long round of applause if you were in person. Thanks for for having laid out so well on the table all the different issues and the kind of the difficult conversations that we wanted to tackle. So thank you for that. I'd like to ask now to Nassaran to contribute and intervene. I know that Nassaran has been thinking a lot about the notion of politicide, which is something that I think also Firouzeh was somehow referring to with different words in a different way, but referring to in her speech. So I'd like to give the floor to Nassaran for her intervention.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Sabiha, Paola, BRISMES, and Firouzeh for having me here. And thank you, Firouzeh, for this meticulous and beautiful context that you just provided. I think it made everything much easier for us to build on that. I think what we're facing now, and in many ways, what we have been facing for some time, has something to do with the conditions of the possibility for effective transnational and international solidarity. And when we talk about those conditions, a big part of the question is how different actors relate to certain struggles and how those struggles are framed. They're always embedded in wider networks of material and discursive forces, and those networks shape which struggle become legible and relatable across contexts and which one remains harder to connect to. So with that in mind, before we dive into the discussion, I'd like to share a quote from Nicholas Mirzoeff. While it may sound somehow too poetic, but given the circumstances that we're facing, I want to leave it here as a sort of point of departure that also softened the air. Mirzo says that the right to look is not about seeing. It begins at a personal level with looking into someone's eyes to express friendship, love, or solidarity. That look must be mutual, each person inventing the other, or it fails. I think this beautiful quote speaks to the nature of solidarity, not as an abstract idea, but as the active recognition and creation of the other in a world that is structured to keep people othered, which is the core of what I aim to elaborate on here. What I want to highlight is this. Although we've witnessed a massive wave of mobilization across the globe since Israel launched its genocidal campaign against Palestinians after October 7, one issue that remains under discussed is the difficulty, or in some cases, near impossibility of similar mobilization within the region itself, especially when we compare it to what has been happening internationally. This has a lot to do with the complex political relations, both within states and between different nations and communities in the region. But it has also to do with the conditions under which many movements operate, conditions that often push them to rely on state support or state alignment rather than investing in the much harder work of building sustained solidarity across movements. One can imagine how much more difficult this becomes for communities such as Iranians or Kurds, whose causes are often alienated or displaced across the region for a variety of reasons. The nature of the power structures they struggle against, their political fragmentation, or simply the fact that they are minoritized in different ways in the place where they live. There has been a heated debate recently about the rise of segments of far-right within the Iranian diaspora and the way they openly cheer for figures like Netanyahu or Trump. I hope others will address the issue more directly, but what I would like to focus on here is something slightly different, which is the long-standing difficulty Iranians have faced in seeking solidarity from other communities in the region and even globally. For a long time, Iran, or more precisely, the Islamic Republic, has often been perceived as a major supporter of resistance against Israel. And because of that perception, the demands and aspirations of Iranian people themselves have frequently been neglected, sidelined, or rendered invisible in broader solidarity framework. I argue this reductionist view overlooks a more fundamental reality, that Iran itself has been deeply embedded in what Michael Hart and Sandro Mezzadra describe as the global war regime. By this, they mean, you all know about this, but they mean far more than occasional wars between states. They point to a condition in which war shapes life, a structure in the economy, social relations, and governance itself. But so seeing from this perspective, Iran is not outside this system as a simple actor of resistance, but very much part of the wider regional and global structures shaped by permanent war. Not recognizing this underlying fact in Iran's case has, to a large extent, led to the othering of the Iranian struggle. One other aspect, I think, worth to be discussed here is what we have been witnessing in Iran since 2017. Four waves of nationwide uprising in only 8 years. Many Iranians understandably celebrate this as a sign that society has become more politicized and it's demanding the right to determine its own future. And that is certainly true. I'm not denying that. But at the same time, if we remember that uprisings are only one form of collective actions among many, this recurring pattern also signals something else, that most channels of mediation, including legal participation, representation, and organized political life, have been almost entirely drained. Meanwhile, the top population is facing intensifying crises and seeking urgent change. So all of these factors have provided a fertile ground for the rise of far-right discourse. Seen against the backdrop of a harshly militarized state structure, this situation can lead to what I would call a kind of politicide. By politicide, I mean the gradual destruction of the very conditions that make political life possible. In this sense, this reminds me of how Yassin al-Haj Saleh, the prominent former Syrian political prisoner and scholar, once described the Syrian revolution as having been rendered impossible. Since you kindly invited me to this discussion, I've been thinking about how we as Iranians, or more broadly as people from the Middle East, might do justice to the Syrian struggle, because in many ways it resonates with our own situation today more than ever. If we return to the idea of war regime, as I described before, we can see how many regional and international actors, among them Iran, Turkey, United States, Russia, and Israel, were involved in ways that made the Syrian democratic transition nearly impossible. Recognizing this complexity can also help us think more carefully about the Iranian case. Perhaps this is why among different societies in the region, people in Syria and to some extent segments of society in Iraq and Lebanon sometimes show a deeper understanding of what is happening in Iran. They too have been very much influenced by the similar networks of power, interest, illusions, and ideology that structure politics within their context. And as the international public sphere has become increasingly and understandably polarized since the genocide in Gaza, we have unfortunately seen a parallel rise of far-right rhetoric among segments of the Iranian diaspora. In this context, democratic forces, including feminists, socialists, human rights activists, ethnic movements, and others, are pushed even further to the margins because they try to oppose both extremes. The far-right campaigns on one hand and the entrenched campus position on the other. This dynamic, I think, has intensified pre-existing, as Firuze just described for all of us, processes of othering between both the global and regional left. And it has left us targeted by the far-right pro-Zionist opposition while simultaneously abandoned by allies we might have expected support from elsewhere. A similar othering dynamic operates even within the national context, the Iranian context, for Kurds who are pressured by right-wing nationalists labeled as separatists and in many cases sidelined by leftists for not being explicitly anti-imperialist or fully communist. And this condition often seen as prerequisites for genuine, quote-unquote, liberation. So methodically speaking, I think these two processes of othering share a key feature. They seek justification for struggles for democratic rights outside the very context in which those struggles emerge. In other words, they fail to recognize the autonomy of these struggles, outsourcing their legitimacy to external conditions, which here would be geopolitical positioning, which ironically, as we know, is highly contingent. We never choose how to be positioned geopolitically. This is just a contingent condition for all of us. So I don't know if I have left any time, but what I would like,
Yeah, you have a couple of minutes, 2-3
okay.
minutes.
Yeah, I was very worried about the timing, so I tried to be fast. So, getting back to the citation that I shared in the beginning when I tried to set the mood for the discussion, this I would really be interested in, against all odds, the geopolitics and state being involved in supporting different movements and being allies. I really think that one of the things that, for me, at least for me, is the urgent call about solidarity would be the same as the same thing that Mizorov quote would suggest, which is against all these processes of othering. We really need to think about how to invent the other, which is, I think, would be part of the conditions for the possibility of solidarity from the very beginning. I think I'm going to leave it here, and then I'll be happy to contribute to the discussion when our other comrades provided their views. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nastaran. You know, I mean, I couldn't agree and resonate. What you said really resonated a lot. I often think of, you know, of like we do have the same problem. Like, you know, I'm thinking of Italy in particular, where we have a kind of smaller diaspora, but yet quite dominated by, you know, the same far right, you know, forces. Whereby with Iranian comrades is really this difficulty almost of, you know, of seeing that we have the same problem. We have a country dominated by fascists, and we have a diaspora dominated by fascists. But it's it's still very difficult to kind of draw those, you know, those common lines.
Just to add one more sentence.
Of course.
And I really want to point that it wasn't like this before. I mean, the few decades leading up to the revolution in 1979. So instead of blaming the communities or the struggles, I mean, indigenous to a country, it would be much more helpful to historicize what's been going on since that moment. Because in the past, the left used to lead all the, you know, mobilizations in diaspora and exile.
Absolutely, and thanks for mentioning this, and you know, and thanks for mentioning Syria, Lebanon, and other you know, kind of situation that parallel Iran in so many ways. You know, you talked about the war regime, so I'd like to now call on Mehrdad, who I know would you know, will give us a perspective on the obstacles and prospects to regional leftist and progressive solidarity. Mehrdad, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Paula, Firuze, and BRISMES to host us. And thank you, Nasaran, for your talk. It was very brilliant. Thank you so much. Yeah, today I want to answer this question: why are we facing a crisis of internationalist left solidarity with the struggles of the Iranian people today? I think it is not a simple problem of misunderstanding. It is not merely a matter of analytical error. It is a crisis rooted in history, strategy, political culture, and most importantly, our own failures, both inside and outside Iran as progressives or leftists. I will present my thoughts in 6 points here, and then last point about what should be changed, as I think. Let me begin with the present situation, about which Firuze also gave us a good context. Now, Iranian society is really under a deep trauma from the nationwide uprisings of 2017 until the last wave of protests in 2026. We have seen lots of Iranian people pouring into the streets, protesting the Islamic Republic and trying to oppose it fundamentally, a kind of anti-systematic movement of Iranian people compared to the last waves of reformist mobilization. But each time the Islamic Republic has responded not with reform or structural changes, but with intensified repression, and each wave of protest has been met with a greater wave of violence. So for a significant part of protesting people inside the country, this confrontation has produced sacrifice but not transition, and then the regime remains. So this has created a sense of political blockage or exhaustion without transformation for many Iranians, both inside and outside the country. Another thing is about this imperialist war against Iran by USA and Israel. As other colleagues also mentioned, we are facing very rare things in our recent history, in our recent collective memory. Now we have a large amount of people call themselves patriots, Iranian nationalists, or actually Iranian far-right nationalists, aligned themselves with the imperialist agendas, with USA and Israel's geopolitical interest. And in their rallies, we have seen that they have clearly called for the humanitarian intervention, as they call, or in other terms, they call for bombing Iran as a way of liberating the Iranian people. And especially after the massacre of protesters in December 25, January 26, parts of the protest, the mainstream parts of Iranian diaspora changed their mobilization into a more apparent imperialist agenda. So, on these days, when the myth of precision strikes by the US and Israelis collapses, when bombs hit residential areas, hospitals, schools, stadiums, and energy infrastructures, some diaspora groups also organize rallies thanking their Uncle Trump and their Uncle Bibi Netanyahu, as they call it. This is not merely a moral crisis, it is a political one. It reshapes how Iranian struggles are represented globally and also allows imperial powers to claim that they act on behalf of the Iranian people. This is one thing. The another thing I want to somehow point to some critique of the Western left, as our other colleagues also explained it. We know that in recent years, many progressive Iranian voices have sharply criticized segments of the Western left for ignoring Iranian popular struggles, reproducing the discourse of the Islamic Republic, treating the regime as an anti-imperialist force, reducing anti-imperialism to anti-Americanism, and privileging geopolitical analysis over class and material analysis. I know these criticisms are often valid, but I think we must be precise. There is one thing about how we categorize all the political forces in West into a single Western left, and how we omit the other currents which may have other tendencies or other opinions about the Iranian people's struggles. Aside from this, I think we must recognize a deeper historical problem. The relationship between the sections of the global left and the Iranian struggles has been problematic since the very beginning of the 1979 revolution. As you remember, intellectuals such as Michel Foucault and Edward Said expressed varying forms of sympathy toward the Iranian Islamist revolutionaries. Also, classical Stalinist parties supported Islamist forces in the name of anti-imperialism, and even sections of Trotskyist movements, such as the US SWP party, adopted deeply flawed positions. This was not simply a tactical mistake for much of them. For many currents, support for anti-imperialist regimes in the global south was a part of a broader strategic orientation tied to their own domestic political survival. So political Islam was romanticized as a counterweight to the US hegemony. This history matters. We know it. The crisis we face today did not emerge overnight, and it's not related to just the past years. Another thing that I want to focus on is our own failures as Iranian progressives, the new generations of Iranian progressives. We must also speak honestly about the failures of ourselves, especially in diaspora. One major mistake, I think, has been the uncritical sanctification of every uprising we had over the last years in Iran. Under repressions, criticism was postponed somehow indefinitely. When we had reactionary monarchists, nationalists, or even fascistic tendencies without segments of our protest movements, we treated it as somehow secondary and somehow something to be dealt with after the regime falls. For example, after the Woman Life Freedom in 2022, we faced a general enthusiasm toward making principle-free alliances with many political forces, including the monarchists, liberal Republicans, and even nationalist currents within the nationally oppressed groups, which had problematic orientations towards people's struggles. What was the result? I think the forces with imperial backing, I mean, in terms of finance, institutional support, media support, and human rights networks, gained hegemonic visibility. And through solidarity spectacles in Western capitals, they positioned themselves as the legitimate partners of imperial powers in shaping a post-Islamic Republic transition. Another major failure I think we had has been a kind of desire for recognition from the same Western left. And as we can see from the enormous volume of theoretical and analytical production about Iran written in English, we can see that little engagement have been made with progressive forces in our region, Western Asia or Middle East as you want. So this is not simply about production in a specific language. It reflects political orientation, I think, speaking primarily to hegemonic audiences rather than building regional solidarities. And when asked why stronger regional ties have not been built, normally we have answers such as language barriers, lack of familiarity with the political currents in those regional countries, political differences, and a fear that some regional forces may support the Islamic Republic. But I think fear cannot substitute for strategy. Regional engagement does not require political unity, I think, for me. It doesn't require shared ideology, I think. It requires pragmatic cooperation, especially around urgent issues like logistical support for refugees displaced by repression or war. I mean, Iranian refugees fleeing the country after each wave of protests, at least. Even if some regional actors do not support the overthrow of the Islamic Republic, they may still have field capacities that can help displaced Iranians. And I think it's really important to make such alliances. In this sense, that level of practical coordination is far more urgent than any abstract debates about whether a journal or a collective in London or New York has corrected its analysis about popular struggles in Iran. So, for too long, I think we have relied mostly on abstract internationalist solidarity. Meanwhile, people across our region, I mean, Iranians, Palestinians, Lebanese, Syrians, Turks, Sudanese, etc., have lived under bombs, sanctions, authoritarian repression, and economic collapse. So, our struggles increasingly resemble one another, one can say. But at the same time, we as Iranian progressives, I think we lack specific qualities, such as organizational capacity. I mean, political organizations rooted in real material basis, or durable regional communication structures and logistic networks, or honest self-criticism, as I try to explain it. I think as long as we avoid confronting reactionary tendencies without our own movements, and as long as we externalize all blame onto the Western left, we will repeat past errors, this time under more tragic conditions. And lastly, I think for to answer what should be done under these circumstances, I think we must both reject campism and alignment with imperial powers in any sense, and we need to rebuild regional progressive infrastructures, not merely, academic discussions, which in themselves are, of course, good. And we must also practice internal critique without fear, even in moments of repression and war. And I think if we do not confront our own strategic failures, we will once again find ourselves trapped between dictatorship and foreign intervention, claiming moral clarity while lacking organizational power. So my last sentence would be: the crisis of solidarity is actual, is real, but it is not only theirs, it is also ours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mehrdad. Yeah, very, very thought-provoking. I was, thinking about also thinking about what Nastaran mentioned before about the need to historicize and, history. So I was thinking, it was recently reading about Dhofar and how Dhofar was this, magical place where you actually have everybody from Lebanese, Iranian, Palestinians and what have you, but also Cubans and, so Chinese. So yeah, sorry, I was just going there with my mind to contrast it with with the weaker solidarity that we have today, not only in the Middle East, of course. So I would like to give the floor now to Susan, who will, in many ways, I suppose, also speak to what Mehrdad told us. Susan, I know that you've been thinking about, the question of incommunicability of the Iranian question within the West, especially Western academia and media. So I'd leave the floor to you for discussing that further. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Paula. I'll try to be concise, but if I exceeded the time, please excuse me and reduce my time in Q&A. I think today, with the global rise of neo-fascism and all that is happening in the world, we could be bold enough to criticize the transnational anti-fascist movement in terms of its ineffectivity. So I perhaps need to give a trigger warning, as I am going to critically focus on progressive academia and media and the transnational movement connected to it, particularly following the disastrous genocide in Gaza. I speak of trigger warning because I remember myself, after summer 2022, immigrated to Europe, and likewise triggered by instances in which I felt my and my loved ones' history of oppression and struggles was normally dismissed. I remember in a course specified to gender and sexuality in West Asia, I told the professor that I think students from Iran and Afghanistan should receive trigger warnings before going through works like those of Lila Abulghod, in which their context is discussed from outside for the outsiders. And that sense of trigger, at least for me, came from a lived experience in Iran, being an audience of English products in which our side of a story, if not directly compatible with the voice of our oppressors, the so-called Islamic Republic, was either skipped or assumed with regards to the speaker's purposes. Another side of the trigger, I think, was related to a sense of asynchronicity. In that example of that class, it felt a little bit odd that after years of the return of the Taliban, the syllabus was still focused on war on terror with the text that was written in early 2000. And of course, there was no mention of gender apartheid in Afghanistan. Similarly, the syllabus was focused on the progress of feminism under the Islamic Republic, while just before that, a feminist revolutionary uprising against the very Islamic Republic had occurred and was brutally suppressed. So in this sense, I mean, I'm using this anecdote and many, many more subsequent to it, as comrades mentioned, to say that to try to talk about a sense of living in parallel worlds with regards to many fellow scholars and activists, non-Iranian ones, I mean. I could name this sense with the help of Negri and Hart in Empire as incommunicability. They call it the urgent paradox of our much celebrated age of communication, where struggles around the world have become all but incommunicable. They relate this problem to the one, lack of common language of struggles, two, the absence of recognition of a common enemy. These two, especially in the case of Iran, are interdependent. The main face of the oppression in Iran is in many places the enemy of the enemy, and also similarly for many Iranians today, the opposite holds true with regards to the victims of direct Western oppression. As regards to the common language, one can think of many material, political, and lingual obstacles on the way of the struggles in Iran to become intelligible. I shall return to this issue shortly, but the point of emphasis here is that beyond the external forces, the external factors, what structures within global centers of knowledge and discourse production accepts and enables this sort of incommunicability? In other words, how the language is used and how the enemy is targeted within progressive academia and media, which makes it hard for someone politicized inside Iran to relate to them without
Susan, you're not well received. I think you're cut. Hello.
I think we can.
Maybe she's coming back. I'm not sure because no, probably not. She froze.
Yeah.
So should we move to to Mazi? What do you think? What would you suggest? Because maybe we could move to Maziar while Susan reconnects, not to not to waste precious time. So I see Susan is still connected, but it's totally frozen. So probably her connection is not strong enough. So while we wait for Susan to come back to our roundtable, so I'd like to call on Maziar to contribute to this discussion, and Maziar's will be. I know that he has been thinking about solidarity and what international solidarity looks like today in this present international context. Maziar, the floor is yours, please.
Excuse me.
Susan, you're back. So is it okay if we finish with Maziar? Is it okay if we finish with Susan? Please, Susan.
Sorry, when was I interrupted?
So you were talking about so you gave us the example of
Okay.
of course apartheid Afghanistan, but I was taking notes, so I think you were beyond that.
Yes. So in short, I wanted to focus on what structures inside the Western academia and progressive media enables this sort of incommunicability or make it hard for someone politicized inside Iran to relate to them without dismissing her lived experience or the larger picture of transnational solidarity. I was going to say that Negri and Hart, again in early 2000, were optimistic enough to think that this widespread incommunicability is not necessarily a bad thing. And each of these incommunicable struggles may vertically attack the heart of the virtual center of empire. But I think now in the digital era of data capitalism or cognitive capitalism, we are rather faced with a literally virtual empire or the online arena that is mainly manipulated by global forces. And when there are alternative voices echoing there, they come through progressive centers still inside the metropole. So there is this main road that things have to come to it and from which to be redistributed again. And this is very similar to the description of the spectacle, I think, by Guy Debord, and we might call this online global arena as well a global society of a spectacle. Two things from this definition is important for my discussion. One is that the spectacle abstracts all individual labor, and its manner of being concrete is precisely abstraction. Second, it separates. So spectators are linked by their one-way relationship that keeps them isolated from each other. So the spectacle reunites the subject through maintaining their separatedness. So with all my sympathy toward the Western academia and these hubs that I am also a part of, we need to be cognizant of these centers as their mode of production is pretty much affected by other kinds of production in the metropole. Same spectacularity is noticeable, and also the same global unequal distribution of means of production also should be noticed within the centers of knowledge and discourse production. Location, mechanisms, and participants in those centers ironically centralize a Western mindset, even when attacking it. And by maintaining this one-way road to this spectacular arena, some certain things happen that are important. In terms of separatedness, I think both Iran and Palestine become separated from their peripheries and are redefined through their relation to the metropole, and also different layers, all kinds of diversities within these locations are reduced again to these one-way relationships. Another thing is a detrimental division of labor is being sustained that is based on West exceptionalism. So one part in the metropole indulge in informational labor, while the very subjects about which they talk and they hold events like us are suffocated under the requirements of material labor. So a dead labor again overcome the living labor that is ungraspable in certain discussions. And let us not forget that even when Edward Said explained Orientalism, he talked of Orient as a career and as and in terms of knowledge production and as a means for giving a sense of self to the Orientalist speakers. And we might be facing with same Orientalist structures when we want to target the empire. And this is where I think the Islamic Republic, with its very successful transnational propaganda, intervenes. Upon a widespread censorship, fascist control, and systematic elimination of archives, it uses obscurity or the very incommunicability of the Iranian question as a tool of survival. And a lot of us find ourselves in a position that both our struggle and our oppression don't have sufficient names to be communicated with others like us. Among these descriptions is like, is Islamic Republic fascist? Oh, West exceptionalist mindset thinks fascism should necessarily come from a white supremacist framework. Is it fine to call it regime? Again, a certain discourse in the metropole says, look, it is against the sovereignty of the country and will pave the way for military intervention. And the same goes for gender apartheid. It's like, oh, people like Hillary Clinton have misused this, so we should neglect it. As you see, all on the one hand, we are trapped in an unnameable situation, and on the other hand, everything about us is projected to something outside of us. Who uses this and who misuses this, and it's a sort of like a certain distance between one's forces and one's and the way that its image is represented. So, and you can think of all the discursive webs and the chains of references that are formed without enough reference to this incommunicable area under a fascist or an authoritarian regime. And you think that what fills them, especially in Middle East studies, are things that may not completely be good to us, but also to the greater transnational solidarity. Among these things are romanticizing of figures and concepts like jihad or Sayyid Qutb, in recent scholarship. And it is very interesting that no one, when thinking of jihad as an anti-colonial idea, or Sayyid Qutb as a fighter, and no one will think like the person who translated Sayyid Qutb to Persian was Ali Khamenei himself, and the late supreme leader that was killed by US and Israel after conducting the largest massacre in Iran contemporary history. So you see like that in this webs and chains, the centrality of the Western mindset is being maintained, while others, or those who are directly or indirectly are related to this Western subject, are remain as separated. But on the other hand, there is this certain sense of mystification of politics or transcendentalism that allows that these subjects, very much preoccupied with moral concerns and the state of the world, to give in to them and disregard the realm of production. Paula, is my time over? Okay,
yes,
so I just
unfortunately, yes, Susan Jan.
Okay, sorry. So I just try to end my discussion with briefly stating that also we should be aware of this this orientalizing, and for us migrants, privileged migrants in the West, a self-orientalization that keeps us further and further from living labor, from life, from embodied politics, and so on and so forth. And if I can just add one more thing, is like maybe focusing on the very relations of production when it comes to producing the political discourse suitable for a transnational fight against the transnational empire can help us. And in this sense, like true figures of militant scholars like Negri himself that was quoted here, or a lot of Kurdish fighters, including Abdullah Öcalan, are much needed in this area to bridge this detrimental division of labor between informational labor and material labor, and also overcoming this separatedness that is sustained through this one-way road towards the centers of discourse production in the metropole. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Susan. Thank you very much. I'd like to, there are many points that were extremely interesting and somehow bridge very well, also everything that we have said and that has been, said in the course of the roundtable. But I'd like to leave space now for Maziar, who will kind of, is the last contribution, but definitely a crucial one. Because somehow what we are expecting from you, Maziar, is an answer to the question of what does international solidarity look like today. So just an easy question, please.
Thank you, Paula. Thanks to Firuza and Sabiha. Spoiler alert, I don't have an answer. I'm trying to put problems of solidarity with Iran in the broader context of challenges of internationalism in the current moment of post-liberal order and this world of hollow nationalisms that we are living in. I'm doing it in part because of widespread methodological nationalism and exceptionalism when it comes to Iran. To perceive the Islamic Republic as uniquely evil or uniquely revolutionary, or to see Iran as uniquely civilized and historically significant, or to see our diaspora as uniquely disgusting. Alongside these exceptionalist perspectives, there's a reverse move to discuss Iran in generic terms that leave out crucial specificities. Discussions that present Iran as a rentier state, as an Islamist authoritarianism, a state shaped by neoliberal policies, or a polity shaped by the 1953 CIA coup and sanctions, and so on. Of course, many of these factors, they contribute to the present day of Iran, but once presented in exceptionalist or generic framings, they become deterministic, and they close the space for what is at the stake in the first place, which is understanding patterns and possibilities of change. The generic and exceptionalist framings also prevent us from putting Iran in the international context. So we don't use what we know about the rest of the world to understand Iran, and we don't use Iran to rethink the world. But Iran is neither the norm nor an exception. It is a front line of the post-liberal world. What I mean by post-liberal world is the current fragmentation and erosion of the US-led international liberal order that came to dominate after the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now, from Ukraine to Palestine, we see unrestrained use of force without any attempt for justification. And we see states that deploy this war logic and militarize strategies, not only against foreign adversaries, but also against their own population. Now, I'm not romanticizing liberal international order, which gave us people like Bush and Blair. But when Trump and Netanyahu bomb Iran or casually pursue genocide in Gaza without any pretense of legality, they're not just exposing the past hypocrisy of the so-called rules-based order. They're actively shrinking the space for resistance from below to resort to legal or moral norms. And this is precisely why this post-liberal moment is so dangerous. But why do I say Iran sits on the front line of the post-liberal order? In part because Iran was on the sidelines of the liberal international order. Iran was one of the very few big major economies in the world that did not join WTO. Iran was heavily sanctioned. It obviously did not have an alliance with Western Europe or North America. Neither it had an actual alliance with China or Russia or any of the neighboring countries. Tehran basically had only Bashar Assad and some non-state actors and militias. And with the Revolutionary Guard's grip over economy and politics in Iran, Iran was already preparing for the incoming global war regime, which Nastaran touched on. So because Iran was so isolated from networks and relations of the liberal international order, it was the easiest choice to disentangle from those relations. And it wasn't a coincidence that Iran was the first choice when Trump started to break up the liberal international order. Now, recent statements of Trump about Greenland, etc., are very brazen, but we must remember that it was during his first term and first years of Trump in the office that he threw the nuclear deal, the Iran nuclear deal, in the bin. And that deal, the JCPOA, it was a great achievement of liberal statecraft. Trump in that same first term, assassinated Qasem Soleimani, which was an unprecedented move. And he has given green light to killing of Khamenei. To give you how significant this is, we only have 3 other heads of states getting killed by another state in modern times, and none of them in the past 4 or 5 decades. This post-liberal world order that Iran sits on the front lines of brings new challenges for international solidarity. With the cosmopolitanism of the liberals being discredited, any other universalist language is also undermined, including human rights discourse, which oscillates between empty rhetoric and being instrumentalized as a justification of crimes. On the other hand, we have the rise of hollowed out nationalisms that are empty of politics, history, and any regard for the welfare of the nation. Between these two, it is difficult to articulate a position that is neither abstract nor nativist. Militarization further complicates the picture. Contrary to the cliche that war is the continuation of politics by other means, militarization is a strategy that closes certain socio-political spaces and blocks certain ways of organizing, and instead it reinforces the geopolitical framings and reorders social priorities. And faced with brutality of military violence, it becomes difficult not to side with the victims of the aggressors. It's difficult to continue to insist on alternatives that actually don't exist. So we get to the current moment of empty campism. If during the Cold War, the apologists for the Soviet Union tried to support some alternative political project with a different vision of the world, now we have many who use a leftist vocabulary to support authoritarian regimes who domestically are no less far right than Trump and Netanyahu, but they offer a geopolitical counterweight. Social media and algorithmic culture adds to the problem, as they favor short, sensational, polarizing content, and long-term organizing and nuanced analysis will struggle to gain any visibility. These all contribute to the problem of incommunicability that Susan discussed, which is something that Iran is acutely experiencing. Exposure, any of you who has been exposed to the Persian-speaking social media knows it's like swimming in the sewage. And against various right-wing rhetorics, we don't have a coherent leftist or even a liberal language. Iran is one of the few countries with 2 winners of the Nobel Peace Prize. One of them is in prison now after being attacked by a monarchist mob, and the other one has supported bombing Iran. We have a far-right regime and a far-right capture of the protest movements, both of them ultranationalist, both of them skeptical of the nation's culture and society beyond any decorative depiction of Persepolis or pretty mosques. And as a final touch, we have the dominant campist perspective that, as Susan discussed, makes it even more difficult to use the language of social justice to push back against both imperialist aggression and authoritarian regime. Against this very grim picture, what do we do? This speaks to Mehrdad's point. Some of the Iranian missiles that have targeted Tel Aviv, they weigh over 1,000 kilograms. And the Revolutionary Guard flies them over 2,000 kilometers. The so-called mother of all bombs that the US dropped on Iranian nuclear facilities weighs more than 13,000 kilograms. And the US Air Force flew them over 10,000 kilometers. The ideological projects of Trump and Khamenei regimes are backed by such material capabilities. They have the institutional capacity to organize thousands and thousands of people to do all sorts of tasks. This doesn't sound like much of a discovery. States have major capacities, and it sounds like a redundant reminder. But it is a crucial point for any vision that wants to go beyond a state-centric politics. And many of us have given up on building material capacities. We are much too captured by symbolism and discursive battles, demonstrations and denunciations. And we want bombs to stop in Iran, Palestine, in Ukraine. Yes, we want to stop the bombs. But what other material are we physically able to move around the world to intervene in social worlds? Too little. We have to start from there.
Thanks very much, Maziar. Even if you haven't given us an answer, like a black or white answer, this was extremely helpful and thoughtful as well, and really thought-provoking. But let me just say that I'm really grateful to all of the speakers who shared their thought. This was precisely. I mean, this was this is, I think, part of the work that I'm very glad that that I'm part of it. But also I really hope that in this tragic moment this space was somehow a positive one.